Cool. Let me kick things off. We're sort of 3 minutes past the hour. So, yeah, I'm Ned. I'm co-founder and CEO of Great Question. We're an all-in-one UX research tool built for the enterprise. And so today we're diving into the intersection of design and research ops, which is obviously a topic near and dear to my heart, especially as a company that has invested a lot in design side of things and obviously cares a lot about research operations. In the context of the research industry, which really sort of kicked off in the 80s, these roles have only recently emerged over the last few years in our industry. And I think that's a great sign of the evolution of the industry in general, where you have these specialized roles and also specialized tools. But we thought it'd be a great time to take stock and examine the differences and overlaps and discover like how we can learn from each of these disciplines. So what are we going to be learning here? Well, we're fortunate to have the amazing Emily from TravelPerk in the red corner, representing Research Ops, and James Wallis from Brex in the blue corner representing DesignOps. And they're going to fight it out in bloody combat in front of you all. And thankfully, both Emily and James are customers of Great Question, which I think is interesting in that they're both supporting research throughout their organizations, but from opposite sides, maybe not opposite sides, but from parallel sides of the design and research side of things. So it's sort of pumped to have them here. And so I thought maybe to start with, first of all, a little piece of housekeeping. If you have a question, throw it in the chat. We want to hear from you. We'll answer them either at the end, we'll bundle them up, or we'll ask them at the end. And we want this to be as interactive as possible. We also have time for Q&A at the back end. But to start with, I'm going to throw Emily in the deep end, and maybe you could just quickly introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about your role and the intersection of design and design ops and research ops, and the ratio of ops team members and stakeholders in your context, and how your team is structured. Love to hear that too.
Cool. So yeah, thanks Ned for the intro, and hi everyone. I'm in London, UK. Sorry, I forgot to share in the chat, but hopefully there might be a few other Londoners on the call. So I have been working for TravelPerk.
I'm just interrupting because it's very hard to hear you. It's like very soft. So I was wondering if you could either speak louder or move closer to the microphone. I assume I'm not the only one experiencing that. Thank you.
Let me see what I can do. How is that any better?
Not really.
Just trying to think. Oh, I've got my laptop on a stand. Maybe that's just causing some problems.
Maybe if you could increase the volume part, often that helps.
On my Mac?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I've done that. So this is as loud as I can.
Okay, I'll shut up. It's still hard to hear you, but maybe other people know how to fix it.
Okay. Otherwise I can go and grab some headphones, and maybe James can take over if that.
I think you're good. Getting some good comments in the chat. That sound is good. Yeah, keep going. You're good. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Jacqueline.
So yeah, I've worked at TravelPerk just over a year now, and so I'm a senior research ops specialist there. My background is actually as a researcher, and I've also done like research manager jobs as well. And I've mainly worked in e-commerce before TravelPerk. So this is kind of one of the first specialist roles where I've purely specialized in research ops, but it's always been part of the roles that I've done, but transitioned into that specialist role. So at the moment, there is 2 of us in Reops, soon to be 3 at TravelPerk. And we support a design team, including researchers, of nearly 40. So there's about 9 of us in the research team, and then the rest are product designers. And we sit within the overall kind of, we call it the builders team, which is part of engineering. So, and that is 300 plus that we support. So while we predominantly support that team, we do also support the wider business on occasion as well. So marketing and things like that. Our teams are based predominantly in Barcelona and London. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else I've missed from your questions. I think one of the things that's really interesting about TravelPerk is that Research Ops was actually there before research. So it supports the designers at first, which is something that I haven't personally come across before. It wasn't myself, it was someone else. So I think that's really interesting. And in prior companies, actually design operations is the role that has been there, and research ops has been part of the researcher's role. They would do that predominantly. So kind of that's my background and how it's been kind of set up in the companies I've worked.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's great overview. Again, if people have questions, please throw them in the chat about this structure or how you're thinking about your organization. And it's funny you say research ops there before research, because we're seeing that more and more, and it's kind of surprising in some ways. But like you said, but previously, if they had researchers, the research, they might be the ones doing research ops, initially, and then might then go and spawn that role. But the other way around is like, we expect designers, we expect PMs, we expect marketers to do research. How can we support them? We're maybe not expecting them to do research ops because it's not their core job. I think that's an interesting parallel. And with that, I'm going to throw to James to do your introduction, because I think you've got an interesting setup there as well.
Yeah, can you hear me first of all? Yeah, great. Okay. So hello everyone. I'm James, as Ned mentioned. Thank you, Ned. I'm a senior design ops manager here at Brex. I've been here nearly 3 years now. And now I used to do as good as a job as Emily did with a thorough answer to this question. So I guess, as I think we're all aware, design ops and research ops can look very different depending on the organization. At Brex, I tend to describe design ops as quite a broad collection of practices. Ultimately, my role is to support and amplify the design team, of course. And that includes brand designers, content designers, strategists, as well as product designers. But I also find myself partnering with engineers, IT, product leads, and the marketing team for a variety of reasons as well. And so in addition to any process and initiatives that directly impact the design team, I'm also someone that teams might come to for research assistance or advice and getting set up. So I kind of float around a little bit to a degree. But yeah, I'm kind of a point person for research, although we don't really have any, as far as I'm aware, anyone that really has that word in their role title. Research. So it's yeah, it's a little bit fluid. But yeah, I kind of look to support not just the design team really, but where I do prioritize my time, then it is more towards the design team, I suppose. But I often say to people at Brex, it's I'm part of the design group, but it's also about helping and supporting people and teams that want to work with design. So it's kind of like I put myself on the other side of the fence as well sometimes, and that often manifests in things like research activities, as well as just the usual cross-functional project work. Did I miss anything?
I think that mostly captured it, and I think we might come back to it. But I think the thing that's worth noting with James and Brex is that there used to be a research function, and at some point that changed, and the decision was made to move away from that, instead support design ops and research ops within that to empower people who do research, designers, PMs, and marketers to do research. And I think that's fascinating as well. It's like TravelPerk started with research ops, no researchers, empowered designers, everyone else. And Brex started with researchers and actually changed tune and leaned into design and design ops. And so, yeah, well, I'm sure we'll get to talk to that. I'd love to maybe dip into sort of some of these definitions and kind of these organizational side of things. So like when we talk about the difference in design ops and research ops, is some of it kind of semantic? Like, should research ops, is there a bigger umbrella these things should really be sitting under, or are there significant reasons for choosing one over the other, going one path or the other? Maybe not. Anyone?
I mean, I think there is, when you look at actually the broad, and sorry, can you hear me okay now? I've hopefully adjusted my microphone. But
Sounds great.
But I think there's lots of like big themes that cross over, definitely in the roles. Like you know, in terms of empowering others, delivering and scaling craft and collaboration and you know, and just making people, enabling people do like the best work they can do, I think is a big part of what we both would do. But I think in terms of research ops and what I see, because we've just in the last couple of months actually brought in design ops into TravelPerk, and although I've worked with design ops briefly before, it's been really interesting to kind of start talking to them and working with them and see the differences. And I think there are some big areas where they just wouldn't touch in terms of kind of like the recruitment side, for example. And I think like the sharing of insights, more specifically, and research insights, they're not as focused on that. But together, a lot of the work that we're doing behind the scenes is going to enable the same things to happen, but we will just be like prioritizing different focus areas. So I think from my perspective, there's a huge amount of crossover, but I have a lot more expertise in research, and therefore I think like that is what I apply to the research ops role. And I'd probably in some ways maybe struggle to do some of the more design ops focused things that I'm seeing them getting involved in, relating to maybe, you know, design systems and brand, which I don't have as much experience in.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I expect there are certainly cases in which, you know, organizations have clear logical motivations for emphasizing either design or research operations in those groups. And I think perhaps below the surface, part of that can come down to like company culture, which could be informed by a number of things, right? So an example might be companies founded by people skilled in business development, for example, you know, may operate slightly differently to companies that are led by engineers or, you know, marketers or people, you know, these are all things that kind of like will inform how the business operates, where the energy goes, and yeah, ultimately the structure and the teams and how they all work together as well. Yeah, I agree with you, Emily. I think there's certainly a lot of crossover and, you know, common themes, I would say. Like I think you mentioned quite a few of them there, just like, you know, the empowerment and granting access, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sorry, Emily.
I was going to say the thing about the kind of the leadership, I think, is actually a big thing that I was thinking about. And I know that like certain people in the background, their backgrounds of some of the leaders at TravelPerk, they've kind of started out more in kind of the research side, the design side, and similar in like previous companies as well. So I think that can have an impact as well on like what tends to happen first, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting. I love hearing about different company cultures. And I remember someone talking about, you know, you can have any culture you want. If your culture could be, we drink whiskey at lunch every day, and that's up to you. And that's quite a choice. It's not my choice, but you could do that. And similar with like, are we going to lead with design ops, with research ops, or with research, or how do we structure that? I'm curious on this front. You've kind of answered this a little bit, Emily, where you sort of talked about. The question I had was how seamlessly people could move between research ops and design ops. Like, because I think this maybe helps the definition of things. And you've kind of answered that in saying, I'm not proficient in design systems or in brand and things like that. You're more on the recruitment and the tooling and the process side of things. And so I'm curious if anyone can touch on that. And the second thing that I'm curious about is whether or not in your organizations, you think that their choice of design ops versus research ops is actually the right choice for the organization, right? Like ultimately, is TravelPerk more of a research heavy organization versus design heavy? Is Brex more of a design heavy versus research heavy? Any thoughts on that?
A hard question. I guess the first part, I think actually, like if I think about the people I know who are in research ops and design ops, actually quite a lot of us have quite broad backgrounds and quite, you know, gone different paths. So I think like, although I said those things, I think like if you have the right team and the right support, like potentially you could definitely like the core skills that you're going to have are going to be there. But like if you have a design team who can, you know, I guess work with you on the design system side, I think it's definitely transferable skills. But like I think there's there's an element of where I feel like I feel more comfortable in research ops, and that's what we're saying. So yeah, I think that's probably a big part of it, is like, what team do you have to support you as well. And then in terms of the choice of design ops and research ops, that's a really good question. I think this is my understanding of the journey, is that, you know, they got the design, like the buy-in to get the design team, and the research ops kind of came in and was supporting the design team, our design team, to do research. And then that in itself then led to getting the buy-in that we needed, that dedicated research team to do the more strategic research, and be able to have that space to do those bigger chunks of research when they're not trying to also do a design role. You know, that's, I'm not saying that designers don't actually do strategic research as well, but it's just that, you know, we've got the researchers who are working on things that are much, much higher level. Like if they were trying to do design at the same time, like that wouldn't work. And I think that's the journey that they've been on. So yeah, I don't know. I'll let James
I love that. Great answer.
So for Brex, I think, I mean, obviously I think there's more of an emphasis on the design group than the research one, because there isn't really a dedicated research one. But that's not to say that research isn't held in high regard and, you know, prioritized at various times in the company. I think what was I gonna say? It's yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, Ned, like Brex did have a dedicated research group. It was before my time, but I can speak to a little bit. It's a little bit speculative, maybe, but I think there are a couple of main reasons why that change happened. The first being that I think it became like the de facto talk to a customer group, right? Which meant that we have designers, product managers, engineering managers, maybe not talking directly to customers as much as they could or should. So that made it a little bit harder, I think, or perceived to be a little bit harder to make you know, some solid customer focused decisions without the need of a specialist involved. So there was that part of it. And then I think the second bit was a feeling of that research was being conducted for the sake of research. So I want to, you know, point out it's a bit different to what Emily was talking about in terms of strategic research, like very important. You can put some energy in there and get some great value. But I guess at Brex, maybe there was a feeling of, research for the sake of it, which meant not really resulting in insights that drove outcomes, you know, that teams cared about at the time. So there was that. And then I guess simultaneously, people perhaps observed the general trend towards that idea of democratized research and people just having access, everyone having access, and that being a good way to increase the learning potential of the whole business, right? So I would also caveat all of that by saying, you know, Brex, I would still say is a work in progress. I'm sure like many organizations are. But yeah, it's been an interesting dynamic, kind of being part of the research operations activities that we have at Brex from within design, and getting everyone from different disciplines involved, and I'm going to use that word again, like access to what people need.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. The especially having met, so we've been a Brex customer. I've obviously met a lot of folks there, and everyone is super curious about the customer and what they need, and it's amazing to see. So any sort of thing that gets in the way of that, and I can see how research might, to some extent, if they become the place to go to get customer answers, the voice of the customer effectively going through this channel, through this filter, versus folks wanting to go and get that from first principles, want to go and hear it exactly from the customer. And then, non-strategic research effectively is what you're talking about, right? Is research for research's sake. How are we going to fill up their time and energy versus finding the most impactful things? The thing that I love about Brex's approach as well is that all members of the senior leadership team participate in continuous discovery at least every month, possibly even more frequently. So there's sort of like 25 people, I think, in there that are plugged in to automatically get continuous discovery happening, to build that customer empathy, build that customer obsession, run things by them, bring that back to the fold so that they can contribute with customer insights first, which I think is awesome. Uh, yeah, I'll ask her. Harry's asked a killer question in the chat. I think I'm gonna put that a little bit later, Harry. Maybe you can throw it in my guide here. But I'm curious whether or not should there be a dedicated team for research ops and design ops? Like, actually, do we need to have these carved out as separate things, or is there a world where these can come in together and maybe it's just the hats that we're wearing, e.g., the titles, and actually they should be reporting into the same function and working in the same way? James, I'm sure you can imagine at some point in the not too distant future, you may actually need someone that's dedicated research ops as the organization scales. And obviously, Emily, you've got your experience with design ops and research ops, but and we had a poll as well. The last poll number 2, thanks for everyone to participate in the poll, said that it sounds like the majority of people here in this room are actually have both in their organizations. So should orgs choose one or the other? Again, is it back to personal preference? And can they be integrated? How are we thinking about that?
Emily, do you want to go?
So I mean, I think this is something that might change like in a cycle, as well as like things change, the organization changes, but I think perhaps it depends on maturity as well. So as maybe in research ops and design ops mature, maybe they become so close together that they do start and their roles start colliding. Like, who knows? Like, I think our team, like, we've just doubled our team size and got a design ops person in the space of 6 months. So I can see, like, in 12 months time, things looking potentially quite different for us, and things really starting to cross over in certain areas. So maybe that is the future, but like you said at the beginning, like some of these roles haven't existed that long, or they're continuing to evolve. So I think that that's something that could be the path, a path for the future as the organization matures in either area and they start to converge. And also probably depends a little bit on the structure of the teams. And like, I've been in a product team, I've been in different teams, I've been moved out of a product team and then ended up in like a centralized research team. So I think it can really depend on like how it's structured.
I totally agree with that. I think well, first of all, I'm interested in the poll results. I haven't worked anywhere where there's been a dedicated team for both yet, as far as I can remember. But I can certainly see how they may fit together in larger organizations. But yeah, I would definitely agree with what you said, Emily, about structure. That's a key factor, I think, and that, as well as the scale of activity that we're talking about. So I mean, it's, we're talking about operations roles. In my mind, these are, ultimately support roles to a degree. And there are common themes among them that we spoke about earlier. And one of those is typically investigating and designing process to allow things to scale and grow in efficient ways. So, and I think these things can be integrated without specialists as well. But I definitely agree with the structure and the scale kind of like being big factors in how this stuff shakes out for each org.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I think also, I guess from our perspective as, a relatively early stage startup, where, 4 years old, team of just less than 30, yes, we don't have a dedicated research ops function yet, or design ops. The idea of it sounds wonderful. What a delight that would be to have support on that end. And we've had different periods of having researchers and not having researchers. We do today. There have been times we haven't. And very early stage, I think the founders are so dominant. But yes, when I've worked in much larger, later stage companies, we need a lot more of this infrastructure around for the trains to keep running on time. I want to take a question now from the chat with Stephanie Schmidt, who asks, where are the highest value, highest impact areas for research and design ops to be collaborating and supporting each other to be effective in their own roles? Like, where is that actual intersection?
I mean,
and Stephanie, I would also love you in the chat to throw any additional color you want to add in there as well.
I think the question that Harry then went on to answer about ROI, I wrote down when I saw that question was like showing and tracking impact across the team, because I think that's where like it can be really hard sometimes in these roles to isolate, okay, our impact. But if you're working together with the full journey of that discipline from design and research and showing that, I think it makes it a lot easier. So I think together being able to do that will have like a really big impact, because that's something that definitely you find challenging in both research and design, to like share it up to numbers sometimes. So yeah, I think that would be one area definitely for me.
That's great. I mean, Emily, you have more experience than I do, I think, in this particular area when it comes to the two worlds kind of working together and overlapping a bit. But yeah, that's what I was going to go as well. Was like, yeah, the kind of better opportunities to share things upwards, like being able to kind of like share out in an understandable language to company leadership, what's been discovered, why it's important, all this kind of stuff. So that makes total sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And it makes me actually think of we did a podcast recently with Kate Towsey from the start of the ResearchOps community. And in it, we have this amazing ResearchOps person, a guy called Pedro Vargas from the Banco do Brazil. And he was talking about how they measure impact. And it's a lot of research-like activities, but it's coming from a ResearchOps lens. And they focus on what they call a researcher effort score. And so it's about how hard is it for you, or the perception of difficulty in, finding past research, or in running research, or doing recruitment, like all those stages of that. But equally, there's a similar sort of research-like activity that you could be thinking about from a DesignOps perspective, just targeting a slightly different audience, right? It's either researchers or people who do research, or it's specifically designers. How challenging is it for you to find the common components of design systems, or build and release new ones, or whatever that is, whatever those problems are. Well, then I guess I will ask Harry's question there, because I think that's great to think about that intersection where, measuring impact, which I think is so critical for these ops roles, especially in tough economic times. What impact are you having on the business? Everyone is being asked that question. But how do we measure this? So I'm curious whether or not you all have figured out the magic path to demonstrating ROI in DesignOps and ReOps.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a big, it's a big question. And we're starting to dive into this a lot more at TravelPerk. I think one of the things is really like linking it back to the decisions that were made off the back of it, and like how that has informed that, like what decision would have been made, looking back at assumptions and hypotheses, and were those hypotheses and assumptions right, and would decisions have been made that would have then gone on to be perhaps maybe incorrect is the wrong word, but could have been higher risk, essentially. So I think that's things that we're looking at, and also kind of what has then gone on to like roadmap. So how has it led to kind of the prioritization for the half of the year or something like that? Those kind of things are areas we're looking at, really starting to communicate and document much better.
Yeah, I would say for Brex, I mean, we have kind of a bit of a history of kind of recording decisions, and like everyone's a part of that. Everyone has the authority to kind of like make a decision, essentially record it in a way that it's explained. So I would say that definitely makes sense. And like in my role, I feel in terms of the question, measuring, promoting ROI of research, I mean, we have a lot of appetite for metrics in the company, as you can probably imagine. So I would say it's part of my role to identify those metrics, as well as support and report them. So this could be the tools that we use, or the information we're getting from research. I'd see that as part of my remit as DesignOps to be involved with, if I'm helping out with these research activities. Excuse me. And so yeah, I think obviously ROI is always important. So I'm always kind of like ready for that question, which is like, show me the metrics, how are we measuring this? When will we know? When will we know when we've got enough, all that kind of stuff.
Is this like an official ledger of decisions made in the organization, or is it more like I created this document to work through the concept, and here's the decision I made?
I wouldn't say it's a strictly formal ledger. It's certainly not an individual artifact, but it's been encouraged since I've been at the company, and I found it quite liberating, I suppose, that everyone should feel they have the authority to take a decision and be able to explain it.
Yeah, and to back it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, we for what it's worth, I've seen the how do we get to this decision or this process to make a decision that was informed by research. And when I was at a large company, we made a decision that was informed by a past research report that dramatically changed the direction of the product, ended up throwing away a bunch of code, ended up delivering a much better product as a result of this research. Like, it was dramatically night and day, chalk and cheese. Great, awesome. Not always easy to come back to that and be like, it was this insight from that. It requires a certain amount of egolessness to be like, I didn't come up with this brilliant idea. It came about via this customer interaction, whatever that was. But the other side, I'm curious whether or not there are also examples of where things go wrong, right? It's like something went wrong. We launched something and it caused a big hubbub. Maybe we, I don't know, launched some new product that didn't go well, or we changed our pricing or decided to stop supporting a particular customer segment. And we're like, if we had done some research, maybe we wouldn't have had such blowback. Anyway, just a random idea. The next shift on a little bit, and then I want to move on to talk a little bit more about the future trends and sort of evolution, where this is going, and save time for Q&A as well. But I think the one question I had here was, we talked at the top about supporting not just designers who are doing this work and maybe some researchers, but there was talk of PMs, there was talk of marketers. Maybe we can talk about the different needs and challenges of supporting these people, like people outside of maybe our direct organization or a direct remit. Are they all kind of the same as everyone else, or actually are there additional challenges we need to be thinking about from a design ops or research ops perspective?
James, I think you should go first on this one.
Okay. Yeah, so it's different flavors, I would say, in my experience. I did say at the outset that yes, I do find myself working with product folks and designers, and it could be during any given week that I talk mostly with the product leads, and maybe even one or two engineering managers involved with research as well. But I think, I generally take the same approach. In any of these cases, it's just like breaking it down to what we're trying to learn. Something I've learned along the way here is, kind of starting off with that simple plan of what you're trying to do. Make sure you understand the steps you need to take to get there, and having that conversation with whoever's trying to get there. There are slightly different flavors to the activities, of course. With the designers, I found myself often supporting, more usability tests maybe, or like some people getting feedback from prototypes, that kind of thing. And that's kind of less likely to happen with a marketer maybe, or a marketing designer. But yeah, it's kind of finer details that are different. But I think, again, like the leaning on core principles can be valuable for any of these cases.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are some specific things that I probably see. I think if I had to give some examples, I'd probably say there's probably a little bit less awareness of maybe some of the governance side of things, and the fact that there are lots of teams in TravelPerk or wherever I've worked wanting to talk to customers, and actually we have to be really mindful of that, particularly in the B2B, which has been a new space, which actually I haven't really touched on much in this discussion. It's been a big learning for me, actually, and I think has demonstrated to me why research ops probably did exist first, actually, because it's very different than I've worked in the e-commerce space. I think one key example that I probably has come up with working with other teams is like surveys is often like perceived as like a quick way to get things, and actually the complexities behind doing a really good survey and like understanding how you track that data through in order to do a good analysis. Actually, like I think that's one of the other challenges, if I had to give an example of where maybe the stakeholders can differ in knowledge and expertise and things like that, like in methodologies or assumptions that things are quite quick and easy to do, and they can be, but I think, yeah, I've had those are one of the ones, but we've had also some great learnings. Like we worked with our brand and PR team recently on a survey, and one of the benefits of that was that, they looked at it very differently, and the focus of it was actually the return on investment of travel, and it got like a big publicity, and it was really cool working with someone who is looking at it from a very different angle, and focusing on different things, and even right through to how they documented and communicated the survey, very different to how we approach it in research. So I think it's really great to have those collaborations because you learn a lot from them.
Love that. It's so easy to be like, look, there's maybe a little bit less maturity in these other departments, and it's probably partly a function that you're spending so much time with design, as an example, and so where they don't have maturity, you're able to get them there in a brief period of time. But maybe people that are doing this less frequently or less interactions maybe take a bit longer. But to your point, they also bring their own new skill sets and new ideas about how to promote it or promote the outcomes and share the insights, because it actually becomes this external facing piece of research. That's awesome. Cool. I'm going to shift gears now a little bit, and would love to kind of talk about how do we see this evolving. Like we've talked a little bit about the fact that this is these emerging disciplines, and things are changing, and there's a lot of different configurations in different organizations and times and staging of this. But where do we see it's going? Anyone love to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned a few things, like in terms of our team has grown, and we have been predominantly had like a one-person team in research ops doing 80% sort of participant recruitment for quite a long time. So I think I could, from what I've seen in like other research and polls and things like that can be a huge part of the research ops role. And I think the opportunity that we have been given at TravelPerk by being able to expand our team is to allow us to really focus on some more things that will have a wider impact. So working closer with DesignOps and focusing on how do we get insights wider across the business? How do we ensure that we're not like repeating research unnecessarily and people are using research more across the business? Making things just more efficient, like can we support more beta testing and things like that, rather than so it's like research at different phases of the project. And personally, as someone with a research background, I think like that research practice role as well, like I think I've actually found myself doing that as quite a big part of the research ops role. I think that could be a space where it evolves and maybe supports not just my current team, but the wider business, and enables other people to do good, learn more about doing great research, basically. So yeah, maybe some of those things.
Yeah, I mean that all sounds good to me. I think for me, I think, well, if I'm thinking about my own situation and how we work at Brex, like I mean, I would say, continuing to increase access to research, being able to conduct it, whether it's you or working with a team, and also just discoverability like of these things as well. Like often things break down if you're waiting to hear back from a particular person or team, but if you can get going by yourself. This is one of the things I've kind of enjoyed a little bit about assisting with research at Brex. Like it's been quite a journey we've been on so far, but what I've seen is quite a few people are maybe intimidated at first at the idea of kicking off research if it's new to them. But what I find encouraging is that it doesn't always need to be a historic endeavor to write a research plan, for example, right? All the plan needs to be, and Emily, feel free to correct me here, is like, your list of questions you need to you need to have an answer for, just to keep yourself and your team on track, right? It doesn't need to be a really really incredible research paper that's going to be published somewhere. It's just a plan to keep you on track. And so assisting people from any discipline to come up with that plan, set them on the right path, and then they've got that access already. They can go off by themselves, hopefully, or just with a smaller amount of assistance to really go and get some good results. And I think yeah, including more individuals from different disciplines in research and these activities is exciting. And I like what you said, Emily, about you know, seeing how the different perspectives. I think you said it was the PR team or something like that. Kind of, you know, carried out this research and reported on it and described it and all that kind of thing. And so yeah, I think in a basic way, just like different people being in the same room is always exciting. And so more of those opportunities, whether it's how we work or the tools we use, I think is exciting.
Yeah, I love that. And it's an interesting conversation, an interesting debate about this, right? It's like, how much should we provide access? And what does this do to the role of research and the quality of outputs where, yeah, maybe some people are daunted by talking to customers, but it's easy to run a survey and what we get back from doing that, like the quality of outputs we get from doing that, and the quality outputs we get from putting non-trained people in front of customers to run research. I'll ask one of the questions from the chat from Liz Barazza. How can we effectively democratize research within the company to make sure that insights and knowledge gained from more informal research are easily shared across different teams and functions? Like, what are the best practices? How do we facilitate this cross-functional knowledge share? I don't know if either of you had much experience on this side of things.
Yeah, I mean, it is a big challenge, and I think one of the big challenges that we have in some of the conversations that are going on at the moment. I think a lot of it is about that. You know, I thought it was quite interesting what James said about like people being scared, you know, or you know, about maybe you know, finding it quite daunting. And I think just giving people some tools and guidance, like not to be afraid to do research, but also giving them some steer on like, well, you know, this is the kind of decisions you might make with this kind of research, and this is the kind of decisions you might make with this, you know. So that risk, like a risk kind of that you're making. And I often have that discussion like, well, what is the decision you're trying to make off the back of this? Like how big and important is that? And then, you know, that really helps like get a sense of whether what they have actually like proposing, or like some of the things they're saying about don't matter, or this kind of thing. I think those, and moving those into like some guidelines or principles as well. You know, we have the luxury of, I guess, researchers, and they have various different tools that they use to allow them to consult on projects, but not always end to end. So we have like this model of different things and different projects based on kind of maybe evaluating risk of decision and understanding that, and then, you know, that is discussed so they can still consult light touch and things like that. So you could, like, that's something that we have put in place at TravelPerk, is like identifying the different projects and understanding, you know, which ones might benefit from a more like hands-on approach and a more consultative approach, and things like office hours. And, you know, I think these have probably been heard for a long time, but those kind of things to remain still sort of in the picture and consulted, but you know, allowing people to still kind of run and lead their own research.
Yeah, I think the challenge of sharing research outcomes, information basically across teams and disciplines is it is a challenge, and is one that's, to be honest, still being addressed within Brex, I would say, or certainly ways to improve. And I've used that kind of word access a couple of times today, and discoverability. These are places I lean on. But something I would say is that I found it a little bit unreasonable at times to assume that people will engage with a brand new tool in order to discover things. So there's often an element of meeting people where they are, right? So you know, an example could be just using a Slack integration or something like that versus getting someone to sign into a completely different tool. I was joking recently that to one of my engineering colleagues, I can't remember what we were talking about, but my message was that but if we want to get the designers to look at a spreadsheet, the best way to do it would be to draw that spreadsheet in FigJam
It's true. It's
rather
true.
than try to get them to sign into Google Sheets.
Yeah,
An
yeah.
extreme example, but yeah, I think it's definitely a challenge and one that I'm trying to address just to kind of make sure people can benefit from all the learnings we're getting, and we can record these and keep them discoverable, so they don't just die in a basement somewhere.
Yeah, and it's I think what we've seen, it's funny you talk about that spreadsheet example, because we have internally, we have these kind of product requirements docs that we build. We call them pitches, a pitch for a different area of product, and it's got its own structure and everything. And recently onboarded this new designer who's awesome. And he's taken it and he presented a pitch to me yesterday that was in a FigJam slide file. And so, of course, that's what they use. I get it. I think the thing that we talk about is, I think a lot of people think their research repository, the font of all this knowledge, where this all knowledge will be stored, is going to be super charismatic, that everyone is going to flock to it and want to consume it. They're like, oh my God, finally, we have this oracle of all our data, all of our customer insights. But the reality is that's not how people think. They're like, I'm trying to find this answer. I'm either going to assume that it doesn't exist anywhere, and so I'm going to go and ask these questions anew, or I'm going to look all over the place, but I'm definitely not going to come and sit and marinate in all the fresh data that's coming in all the time. And so ultimately, we think that it needs to be more charming. It needs to seek you out. It needs to find your interests, and we need to push it to the edges of the organization to find people where they live, whether that's in Slack or email, with the topics they care about. I care about customer onboarding for enterprise customers or whatever it is. That's definitely something that shaped our research repository work. I think the final thing I'm going to throw to some questions would be, I'm kind of touched on this a little bit, but what emerging tools or methodologies do you think are going to shape the future of design ops and research ops? I think I know the question on the research ops side of things, or I hope I do. I'm curious about the design ops side of things, because I'm just not as deep in that. But yeah, any thoughts on that?
So I would say, I mean, I'd go back to my previous response about the kind of trends, and I go back to this thing about people being in the same room, especially cross-functional people. So when it comes to tools, I guess anything that I see that working in, I try to think of an example. I guess a tool like Figma, for example, they've recently introduced some more developer tools within their offering of a design tool, right? So I'm not sure, to be honest with you, within Brex how much we're using that right now, but I can definitely see value there, and so I'm interested in, and again, this challenge of getting people to use the same tools where their maybe day-to-day jobs don't necessarily require that, and so I think that can be very difficult to get right. To your point, Ned, and if it's like an incredible tool, if you've built the perfect tool finally, then and you can get everyone in there, that's great. But more often than not, I think it takes a little bit of cajoling, a little bit of wrangling, and maybe you need to kind of find a way to connect people with something else. And so that's part of the kind of ongoing challenge, I think, as well, of getting various teams to work efficiently together, and giving them the benefit of things like research findings that we get.
Yeah. Emily, anything from you on that front?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, without jumping into the obvious, which I think is what you were saying there about AI and like how that can improve operational efficiency, and reduce manual tasks and things like that, which it's very common. I think that what was said actually about like getting people engaged and excited, and like how can how can we use tools to, you know, bring to life this kind of like the customer voice. And we've been working on archetypes to really bring to life and help spread and help people understand more about who our customers are. And that has been really interesting to see how socializing them has kind of engaged people into the research space. And I think bringing those to life more and more, like in different ways, and you know, through tools or through, you know, AI, we've kind of had lots of ideas about how are we going to socialize these in different ways and also keep, you know, evolving them and keeping them up to date. I think that that's one area as well, that is quite a new thing for us, and we don't know kind of exactly what the journey of those is going to be now the first kind of phase has been done. So I think that could be an interesting one.
Yeah, I love that. I think that also highlights how hard it is to sometimes share these best practices, where a lot of the magic of it is internal data that you can't really share. Like I'm like, oh my God, can I see these archetypes? These sound amazing. How did you put them together? And how are you presenting them? And what are they structured on? You're like, I kind of don't want to tell you because I don't want my competitors to see this. Like, this is proprietary information. But maybe you can show me offline. I think that I'm going to shift to questions now, given that we're running a little bit low on time. Feel free to throw any other questions in. I would love to know, one of the questions from Julianne Ward was talking about research democratization. And how have you, or have you battled any challenges with non-researchers, you know, bringing their own biases or interpreting insights that are generated? Maybe a researcher would, you know, is more aware of these biases. Any sort of experience in anti-bias training or negative experiences? Like, how much are we touching this? And I know this is a bit of a third rail, so I think we can all go easy on this one. But yeah, we'd love to hear any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, the tools like these, like archetypes I mentioned, is actually a great way to sort of have that kind of, you know, support thing of like looking at those and having that kind of groundwork, I guess, done. But a lot of this links back to some of the things that I said, is that, you know, working out a model for being able to consult and support those designers, and, you know, for them to share and get feedback. Like, we have really encourage that you know, throughout. So although they might be leading things, there's lots of ways that, you know, they're sharing their research plan and discussion guides. So, you know, we can look at those and go, actually, you know, maybe you've made some assumptions here. But I also think ResearchOps acts as a really good like layer of like, when you might be talking to them specifically about their recruitment brief, but actually you then maybe just ask some questions about certain things and realize certain things. And I've built a lot of knowledge around segmentation, things like that. And I think having that one person that's kind of overseeing, or not one person, but it might be a couple, overseeing that, is another way that you can kind of help with that. And I've really seen the benefits of having that on the team and being able to support more in that education space.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. I think I totally agree, and from my point of view, I think part of what we've tried to do is you know, have that education piece, have that documentation. We've been helped by Great Question on this front, actually, where we've had some principal researchers come and speak to our teams. You know, these would be teams that include people that haven't done research before, perhaps. And I would also say that this is probably an area where, you know, obviously through experience, you're going to get to learn some of this stuff. And so where we talk about the similarities and the crossover between DesignOps and ResearchOps, these nuanced, like finer details of research best practices, this is where you probably will get a bit more value from a dedicated team, maybe just through that experience and awareness of things like bias that mentioned in the chat there. Yeah, ways to interpret insights, write insights, create them, all this kind of stuff. So I think it's open. It should feel open, at least within Brex. But yeah, there's definitely some expertise that can come with experience that will help teams.
Love that. I think both those talk a little bit to Harry's comment about, you know, maybe we should be rebranding ResearchOps and DesignOps to more research enablement. Because I'm not just doing the ops for you, I'm actually helping you, supporting you throughout that whole journey of this thing. And I'm sure it's similar on the DesignOps side of things. It also talks to actually the original generation of Great Question, which was I was frustrated because we couldn't get access to the research department's time or their tools. And so I set out to go on and research myself, rogue research, as we call it, which happens in every organization. And all I actually wanted was someone to look over it, to give me a guidance. Am I doing it the right way? I actually craved that input because I wanted to get better and I wanted to do a good job and I wanted to produce rigorous results. But I didn't. In reflection, I was producing pretty mediocre results and touting them as the truth. Lessons learned. But through that experience, I got better, and then that's obviously made me a better researcher, I believe. Great. We're at time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, James. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Jacqueline, and everyone else on the team at Rosenfeld, Michelle, and Karen. This is awesome. We're going to send out the recording afterwards. We're actually probably going to do a little write-up on this. We'll put that on our blog and we'll share that out with everyone. And any questions I didn't quite get to today, I'll make sure we get those answered and we can put those in there as well. So yeah, thanks again.
Thank you, Ned.
James,
Thank
Emily.
you. Thank you all.